Right here on this channel, we have tested all of the 85mm f1.8 lenses for Sony mirrorless cameras. We've even tested all of the 85mm f1.4 lenses. But have we tested all of them together in one ultimate epic showdown to find out once and for all which is the godfather of 85mm lenses? No, Tom, you haven't. Why are you asking that question? Because, my friend, that's what we're doing today. That's right, today I am going to be testing all 8 85mm lenses that are currently available on the market for Sony E-mount cameras. And seeing as we're going all out, I'm even going to throw in the old Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG HSM lens that is now technically discontinued, but you can still pick this lens up for a very, very reasonable price on eBay, so I thought, fuck it, more the merrier, right? This brings our total number of lenses to 9, and in order from cheapest to most expensive, this consists of the Yongnuo 85mm f1.8 DF DSM, the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 STM Mark II, the Tokina 85mm f1.8 ATX-M, the Samyang AF 85mm f1.4 FE, the Sony 85mm f1.8 FE, the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG HSM, which is the old one, the Zeiss Batis 85mm f1.8, the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG DN, and finally the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master. Rather than spending the next, 20 minutes trawling through all of the specs individually, instead I've made this handy little cheat sheet that makes things a lot easier to digest. Feel free to pause the video now if you want to take a look at this sheet in more detail, but essentially these are the key things you need to know. The Yongnuo, both of the Sony lenses, and both of the Sigmas are the only lenses to include manual dials and switches on the lens barrel. The new Sigma and the Sony G Master both feature a manual aperture ring that can be declicked, which might be a handy feature for videographers. The Samyang, the Zeiss, both of the Sonys and both of the Sigmas all have a weather-sealed construction, whilst the cheaper options do not. Though it's worth noting that although Samyang state that their lens body is weather sealed, it doesn't include a rubber gasket around the lens mount, whilst the other weather sealed lenses do include this extra protection from the elements. The Zeiss is kind of the oddball in this group as it features an OLED screen that denotes the focusing distance, as well as having built-in optical stabilization. Although the Yongnuo is the smallest, lightest and cheapest lens in our test, it's the only lens to be made predominantly from plastic, whilst the rest are made either entirely from metal or a blend of metal and hard plastics. And finally, these days you can buy a copy of the old Sigma 85mm on eBay for between £700 and £750 or $800 and $1,000 in the US, depending on the condition of the lens. In terms of weight, this thing is a bit of a beast, coming in at 1.1 kilograms, so if you suffer from back problems, this might be the one to avoid. So when it comes to scoring for price, I think I'm going to award a point to all of the lenses that fall below the £500 or $600 price mark, as in my opinion, this makes them all very affordable options. When it comes to build quality, I think the winners are the Zeiss, both of the Sigmas and the Sony G Master, as these lenses are all extremely well built and feel solid as a rock. Finally, for handling, I'm going to give points to the Yongnuo, the Sony f1.8 and also the new Sigma, as all of these options are small, lightweight and include features that are actually useful, such as a manual MF to AF switch, a customizable button, and in the case of the Sigma lens, a lockable and declickable manual aperture ring. The Sony G Master just misses out on a point here as it's notably heavier than these other options, and the aperture ring doesn't feature a lock switch, which personally I find slightly annoying as it means that it's possible to accidentally knock the aperture ring from auto to a completely different setting whilst it's hanging by your side on a camera strap or in your bag. Okay, well done for getting through the specs. Now let's do the fun stuff and take these lenses out for a test drive. During the following tests, I shot exclusively at the lens's respective maximum apertures to see if they could keep a sharp focus even with an extremely shallow depth of field. The good news is that all of these lenses are able to work with Sony's IAF and face detect features, which makes taking portraits a total breeze. With IAF deactivated, all of the lenses were able to lock on focus quickly in good lighting with absolutely no hunting at all. In low light, the performance continued, with all of these lenses doing a great job of locking on focus in extremely low light conditions. So in this round, I think all of these lenses gain a point. In video mode, all of the lenses were able to keep locked onto Amber's face as she walked towards the camera, with the only exception being the older Sigma, which would unfortunately keep dropping focus as Amber got closer to the camera. When we repeated the test at a faster pace, it was pretty much the same result, with all of the lenses managing to keep up apart from the old Sigma. As for AF noise, the Sony f1.8 and the Zeiss were by far the quietest of the bunch. The Yongnuo, the Viltrox, the Tokina and the Sony G-Master were all still very quiet, though weirdly our camera's built-in microphone picked up a slight purring noise from each of these lenses. And finally, the Samyang and both of the Sigma lenses were also very quiet, but they did produce a slight clicking noise. Weird purring and clicking noises aside, all of these lenses deserve a point in this round, apart from the old Sigma, which just isn't quite quick enough when it comes to focusing in video mode. Okay, let's talk about bokeh now, and obviously the f1.4 lenses have the slight advantage here as their wider maximum apertures mean that the defocused areas are slightly thicker than the f1.8 lenses. Looking at these results, I think the f1.4 lenses all produce the smoothest and nicest looking bokeh, but the Samyang offers the smoothest of the bunch. In our bokeh balls test, the Viltrox and the Tokina created the nicest looking orbs, with round balls at the centre, only turning slightly misshapen towards the edges of the frame. The f1.4 lenses all produced larger orbs, but all of them create misshapen orbs at the corners, which isn't perfect. So in this round, the Samyang, the old Sigma, the new Sigma and the Sony GM get a point for producing the smoothest looking bokeh, whilst I'm also going to award points to the Viltrox and Tokina because they generate the nicest bokeh balls. So before we get to the part you're probably all waiting for, which is looking at some real world images, I'm just going to spend 60 seconds, timer up here. We're going to look at how these lenses perform in a controlled environment while shooting wide open at their respective apertures using our lens chart to try and root out any signs of lens defects. Starting with the f1.4 lenses, all of them suffer from pinkish distortion and dark corners. Zooming into the center, the new Sigma is the sharpest of the bunch, closely followed by the other lenses, which are all marginally softer. The older Sigma is the only one to exhibit blue fringing. At the corners, the Sony and the Sigma are the sharpest, with the old Sigma in third place and the Samyang in last place with a pretty mushy result. Shooting at the lens's minimum focusing distances, the old Sigma is actually the sharpest lens, the new Sigma is in second place, and the Sony G-Master and Samyang fight it out for third. Over to the f1.8 lenses now, and these lenses also feature pincushion distortion and dark corners. At the center, the Tokina and the Zeiss are by far the sharpest, with no fringing issues at all. It's worth noting that the Sony f1.8 does have a noticeable blue fringing problem. At the corners, the Zeiss is the sharpest lens, with the Tokina in a very close second place. At the minimum focusing distances, the Tokina is the sharpest lens, with the Zeiss and Sony in a close second place, despite the Sony still having that substantial blue fringing issue. If 60 seconds was too quick for you, that's what she said, then don't worry, you can download these lens chart images for free using the link in the description below, so download them, take a look for yourself. One thing I should probably address before moving on in this test is the crazy amount of lens distortion displayed by the new Sigma lens. Now, although at first glance I know this looks like bad news, however, Sigma state that in order to keep the lens small and sharp, they had to sacrifice some of the in-lens corrections, namely those elements that correct for lens distortion and vignetting. And this decision was made mainly because these types of lens issues are very easily corrected these days using Sony's in-camera lens corrections, or if you shoot in RAW, using the lens correction profiles that are available to you in Lightroom or Photoshop. And to be fair, they're really not wrong. As you can see see here, once the lens correction profile has been enabled in Lightroom with a click of a button, the lens distortion issues are pretty much entirely gone. This goes for all of the other lenses too. Just activate the relevant lens correction profile in Lightroom or Photoshop and any lens distortion and vignetting is instantly cleared up. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at some real life photos to see what these lenses can create. Well, once I'd edited the images in Lightroom, I was honestly very pleased with the results from all of these lenses, and from a distance, it was pretty hard to differentiate them from one another. Now, there are a fair amount of images here, so rather than me just rabbiting on for the next few minutes, here's some smooth, relaxing jazz so you can just sit back and enjoy the images. Sorry to break your zen for a moment there. I hope you're enjoying the jazz, but one thing I should mention is that the Samyang does create a noticeable yellow tint to your images. However, if you are shooting in RAW, which I assume most of you will be, this is actually a fairly easy thing to remove just using the white balance tool. Anyway, back to the jazz, sorry. So before we finish scoring for this round, there are a few issues I need to address with two of these lenses. Firstly, the Yongnuo. Now, despite the AF reticle telling me constantly that the focus was locking onto Amber's eye and face, I did notice that a number of the images that I took were ever so slightly front focused. This means that the resulting images were actually focused on either just the tip of her eyelashes or on her cheek, or in the case of full-length portraits, on her shoulder rather than her face. Now, I hope this is something that Yongnuo can address and fix in a future firmware update, but for now, this is not ideal. Now, the second offender is the Samyang. Although everything seemed to be going fine during the shoot, once I'd uploaded the images to Lightroom and had a bit of a look, I realized that half of the images were just totally out of focus, despite my camera reassuring me throughout the shoot that the focus was locking on to Amber's eyes and face. Some shots were just slightly out of focus, but others were just so far out of focus, it was beyond a joke. In contrast with the other lenses in the test, the vast majority of the images I came back with were absolutely pin sharp and bang on in terms of focus. A further thing I should mention is that over the past year I have tested 3 copies of this Samyang 85mm on this channel, and out of those 3 copies, 2 of them have given me weird focusing issues, which, to be honest, doesn't really fill me full of confidence. Now, I know that could just be down to bad luck and me getting 2 dodgy copies, and I know there are a lot of people who have the Samyang lens and absolutely love it, have no problems at all, but it's just something that I needed to share with you guys to make you aware of. So with all of that in mind, when it comes to scoring, I think first and foremost we need to deduct a point from the Yongnuo and the Samyang for Photo AF, as clearly these lenses that I tested don't work flawlessly like I first thought, whilst the others all worked perfectly. As for image quality though, taking into consideration both the lens chart results and the photo shoot images, the new Sigma, the Tokina and the Zeiss are by far the best performers and deserve a point apiece. So at the end of scoring, drum roll please. The winner and the best 85mm you can possibly buy for Sony mirrorless cameras is the Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG. Now, anyone who knows about this lens probably won't be surprised. This lens is super sharp, rapid to focus, and has an array of useful features, all built in a small, rugged body. And that is why it is the deserved winner of this test. Though before I go, I need to give a very big shout out to second place, which is the Tokina 85mm f1.8 ATX-M. When comparing the lens chart results of this lens against the winner, the Sigma 85mm, the results are actually insanely close. Now sure, the Tokina may lack some of the advanced features that the Sigma has, like weather and dust proofing, as well as manual buttons and dials and all that jazz, but if you can get past that, for just £400, this thing is insanely well priced and offers incredible image quality, and it would definitely get my recommendation for anyone shopping for an 85mm lens on a very tight budget.